At dawn, when 94 chrome-glinting motorcycles thundered into the lot of Jake Riker's crumbling Mesa garage, he knew his time was up. The engines growled like a rolling storm, shaking the walls of his shop. 24 hours earlier, he'd made a choice no mechanic should ever make. He'd touched the daughter of a man named Reaper, the vice president of the Iron Brotherhood, without permission. But Jake had seen something in her custom wheelchair that everyone else missed. Something only a mechanic with his training would notice. Something worth risking his life over. Now, as leather-vested riders encircled his shop, their faces shadowed by mirror glasses, Reaper stepped forward, fists clenched. Jake's own hands tightened around a torque wrench, knuckles white. He'd either performed a miracle or signed his own death warrant. 14 hours earlier, Jake had been under the hood of a beat-up Honda, fixing brakes for Mrs. Chin at half price, because she was on a fixed income. His own life was barely holding together, rent overdue, business failing, a bad leg from an IED in Kandahar that ended his army career. But his tools were clean, his workspace ordered. Precision was the one thing he still controlled. Then the rumble came. Not an army, not yet. Just one bike. A Harley so polished it looked liquid. The man who climbed off was built like a bear, salt and pepper beard. A vest covered in patches that told stories of loyalty and violence. The Iron Brotherhood. You Riker. The man's voice was gravel. Heard you're the only one in Mesa who can fix what others can't. Behind him, a sleek black van pulled up. A wheelchair lift descended with a quiet hum. And there she was, Sophie, 16, with tired hazel eyes, sitting in a titanium frame wheelchair that looked like it cost more than Jake made in 2 years. My daughter, the man said. Chair squeaking. Bearings need work. Jake hesitated. I fix cars and bikes, not medical equipment. The man moved closer. Not threatening, just present. Your sign says you fix what others can't. Jake looked past him to Sophie. She gave him a small, curious smile. He won't hurt you, she said softly. The man removed his glasses. Gray eyes, hard as stone. Name's Reaper. This chair cost 40 grand. Built by specialists. But 3 people told me you see things others miss. Jake felt the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. This wasn't a repair. It was a test. He nodded. Bring her in. Sophie rolled forward, wincing slightly as her chair bumped over the garage threshold. A tiny reaction, quickly hidden. But Jake saw it. He saw everything. Reaper filled the small space as Jake knelt beside the chair, his trained eyes scanning the frame, the alignment, the weight distribution. In less than a minute, his blood ran cold. This wasn't a broken chair. It was a wrong chair. The battery was positioned to strain her spine. The wheels were misaligned by degrees, forcing her shoulders to compensate. The brakes engaged unevenly, jerking her forward with every stop. He'd seen this before, not in a wheelchair, but in a Humvee outside Kandahar. A flaw everyone else signed off on. A flaw that would have killed 4 soldiers if Jake hadn't caught it. How long have you used this chair? He asked quietly. 2 years, Sophie said. Since the accident. Does it hurt? She went still. My shoulders. My back. But they said it's the best money can buy. Jake looked up at her. Money doesn't always mean right. Behind him, Reaper's voice cut the air. You got something to say, mechanic? Every instinct told Jake to stay quiet, fix the squeak, take the cash, and survive. But Sophie was watching him, her eyes holding a fragile, desperate hope. He stood slowly. I can fix the squeak, he said, looking straight at Reaper. But if you want, I can fix the real problem. The garage went silent. Reaper's jaw tightened. What problem? The chair's engineered wrong. She's in pain because it's built for looks, not for her. Reaper's expression didn't change, but his eyes darkened. 40 grand. Specialists. Engineers. And you're saying they're all wrong. I'm saying they didn't listen to what the chair was telling them. Jake said, I can fix it. Or she can hurt for another 2 years. Sophie leaned forward. You really think you can make it better? Jake met her gaze. I know I can. Reaper studied him for a long, tense moment. Then he spoke, each word measured. You have 24 hours. Rebuild it. Make it right. If you're lying, if you hurt her, you'll answer to me and 93 of my brothers." He turned, helping Sophie into a temporary chair. As they left, Sophie looked back, her eyes glistening. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me." Then they were gone. The Harley's roar faded into the desert morning. Jake stood alone, staring at a $40,000 wheelchair he'd just promised to rebuild in one day, knowing that if he failed, 94 Iron Brotherhood riders would return at dawn, and they wouldn't be coming for a tune-up. With the clock ticking and the Brotherhood's wrath on the line, Jake begins a rebuild that could save a girl or end his life. But as he strips the chair down, he finds something hidden inside, a secret message that changes everything. The garage door screeched shut, sealing Jake in with a wheelchair and a deadline that felt like a ticking bomb. 24 hours. One day to undo what a team of specialists with unlimited budgets had created. He rolled up his sleeves, the familiar scent of grease and metal filling his lungs. This was his language. This was where he made sense of the world. Machines didn't lie. They didn't leave. They just needed someone to listen. He started with complete disassembly. Every bolt, every joint, every wire was laid out on his workbench with surgical precision. The frame sections here, wheel assemblies there, control systems in their own space. The battery pack, a monstrous 47-pound block, was positioned exactly where it would strain Sophie's lower back. Just looking at it made Jake's own old injury ache in sympathy. As he worked, his mind cataloged failures faster than his hands could move. The seat cushion was a disaster, compressing unevenly, creating pressure points that would cause sores. The footrests were mounted 2 inches too far forward, forcing Sophie's knees into hyperextension. Chronic pain, joint damage, all because someone measured her once in a clinic and never asked how she felt after 6 hours of use. The sun dipped below the Arizona horizon, painting the sky in fiery shades Jake didn't see. He was in the zone, the same focused trance he'd entered in Army motor pools under deadline and gunfire. Mechanics keep soldiers alive. His sergeant's voice echoed in his memory. Every bolt you tighten is someone's kid coming home. Around 8 p.m., his fingers brushed against something strange inside the seat cushion, paper, tucked deep where no one would ever find it unless they tore the chair apart. He pulled it out carefully. It was a small, worn piece of notebook paper, edges soft from compression. The handwriting was young, feminine, painstakingly neat. "Someone please help. It hurts." For words. That was all. For words Sophie had hidden because she'd been told by experts her chair was perfect. For words that screamed the truth she'd been forced to swallow for 2 years. Jake set the note next to the old photo of his Army unit, 5 soldiers, 3 of whom never made it home. He looked from their smiling faces to Sophie's hidden plea. This wasn't about proving he was right. This was about saving her. He picked up his wrench and got back to work. By 11 p.m., doubt crept in like poison. What if he was wrong? What if the California engineers were right, and he was just a broke mechanic with the savior complex? What if he made it worse? He could see his ex-wife's disappointed face. "You always think you know better than everyone else, Jake. One day it's going to cost you everything." His phone sat on the bench, Reaper's number programmed in. He could call, apologize, say he'd overstepped. He'd survive the shame. But Sophie wouldn't survive another 2 years in this torture device. His eyes fell on the note again. "It hurts." He put the phone down. Midnight. 6 hours left. Jake stood, his body protesting, his hands steady. He had a plan now. Not modification, but reconstruction. First, weight. The titanium lower frame was beautiful, expensive, and 12 pounds too heavy. He cut it away, sparks flying. In its place, he bonded salvaged carbon fiber from a wrecked sport bike. Light, strong, perfect. Every ounce matters when you carry it all day. Second, alignment. The wheelbase needed to be 3 inches longer. He measured 7 times before making a single cut. In the Army, they said measure twice, cut once. Here, he measured 7 times because Sophie's spine depended on it. Third, suspension. He scavenged microshock absorbers from an old mountain bike in the corner, machining custom brackets to fit Sophie's wheels. Now the chair would absorb cracks in the sidewalk, not her body. Fourth, the joystick. The original engineers made it precise, which meant stiff. Jake recalibrated the sensitivity by 40%. Now it would respond to the lightest touch. Fifth, comfort. He rebuilt the seat from scratch with memory foam and medical-grade gel, repositioned the footrests based on Sophie's actual leg length, not a chart, adjusted the armrests to where her arms would naturally rest when she was tired, not when she was sitting up straight for a doctor. 5:30 a.m. The eastern sky glowed with first light. Jake stepped back, exhausted, and looked at what he'd built. The chair was different. Sleeker. Less like medical equipment, more like a precision instrument. He tested every joint, every movement. The wheels rolled true. The shocks compressed smoothly. The joystick responded to a feather's touch. It was right. He had 77 minutes until Reaper returned. Jake sat against the wall, closing his eyes just for a moment. "Please," he whispered to the empty garage. "Let this work." 6:30 a.m. He cleaned up with ritualistic care, washing grease from his hands, changing into his last clean shirt. The garage door stood open to the cool morning. Birds sang. A dog barked somewhere. Peaceful. Then he heard it. Distant like thunder. Growing. The rumble. His heart hammered against his ribs. He stayed on his stool, the rebuilt chair beside him, and waited for 94 Iron Brotherhood riders to decide his fate. The first bike rounded the corner, chrome gleaming. Then another. Then 10. They kept coming. An endless river of steel and leather, filling the street, the lot, the desert around his shop. The sound of their engines was a physical vibration in his chest. Then, one by one, they cut their engines. The silence was worse. Reaper dismounted slowly, his brothers parting for him. He stopped 10 feet from the garage, his expression unreadable behind his glasses. "Where is it?" he asked, voice low. Jake gestured to the chair. "I kept my promise." Reaper walked forward, the bikers moving with him like a tide. They crowded around the chair, murmuring, "It's different. Lighter. Frames modified." Reaper circled it slowly, not touching, just examining. 5 full minutes of silence. Jake barely breathed. Finally, Reaper looked at him. "Talk me through it." Jake did, explaining each change in simple, respectful terms. The bikers listened, some nodding, some asking sharp technical questions. They understood machines. They understood function. When Jake finished, Reaper removed his sunglasses. His eyes were wet. "Sophie's in the van," he said, voice rough. "Let's see if you're a genius or a dead man." As Sophie settles into the rebuilt chair, her reaction will decide Jake's fate. But her first words aren't what anyone expects, and they reveal a secret about her accident that even Reaper never knew. The van door hissed open. Sophie appeared in the entrance, backlit by the rising sun, her face a mask of guarded hope. Jake recognized that look, the same hollowed-out expression soldiers wore after too many disappointments. The kind of hope that hurts. Reaper moved to her, and for a moment, the dangerous biker vanished. In his place was just a father. He lifted her gently from the standard wheelchair, his hands careful, practiced. Jake saw how light she was, how fragile, how much faith she was placing in a man she'd met only yesterday. Sophie settled into the rebuilt chair. The garage, the parking lot, the 94 watching bikers, everything fell into a breathless silence. Her eyes widened immediately. Her hands gripped the newly positioned armrests. Her feet found the footrests, now perfectly placed. Her spine straightened naturally, no longer forced into a painful curve. "It's lighter," she whispered, voice filled with awe. "It's so much lighter." She reached for the joystick, touching it with just her fingertips. The chair responded instantly, rolling forward with a smooth, silent grace. No lag, no strain, no battle for every inch of movement. Sophie's face transformed. The guarded shell cracked, and underneath was pure, unbridled joy. She rolled forward, turned, rolled again, navigating the oil-stained concrete of the parking lot. She hit a crack in the pavement, the kind that used to jar her teeth, and the new shock absorbers swallowed the impact. She barely felt it. Tears welled in her eyes, but she was smiling. A real smile, one that lit up her whole face. She did a full circle, then another, faster now, her movements fluid and confident. The chair was no longer a prison. It was an extension of her. The bikers watched in absolute silence. Jake saw hard men, faces lined with violence and road wear, wiping at their eyes. They saw it too. Not just a fixed chair, but a girl remembering what freedom felt like. Sophie stopped directly in front of Jake. Tears streamed down her face, but she was laughing, a breathless, disbelieving sound of pure release. "I forgot," she choked out. "I forgot what it felt like to not hurt." Those words hit Jake harder than any IED blast ever had. For 2 years, she'd lived in constant pain, told the problem was her, not the machine. She'd accepted suffering as normal. And now she remembered. Reaper had been watching, his expression cycling through disbelief, joy, and a raw, aching grief for all the pain she'd endured unnecessarily. His jaw was clenched tight, fighting for control. He removed his sunglasses completely, not caring that his eyes were wet. He walked toward Jake. Jake tensed. This was still Reaper. Still the vice president. Still a man who could end him with a nod. Reaper stopped inches away. The world held its breath. Then he extended his hand. "You saw what million-dollar engineers missed," he said, his voice thick. "You saw my daughter when they just saw a case study." Jake took his hand. The grip was firm, but not crushing. It was respect. The silence shattered. Bikers clapped, whistled, shouted approval. They crowded around the chair, asking Sophie questions, examining Jake's work, clapping him on the shoulder. The tension of the morning dissolved into a wave of relief and celebration. Sophie reached out and grabbed Jake's hand. "Thank you," she whispered again, her voice breaking. "You gave me my life back." Jake could only nod, overwhelmed, but the celebration was short-lived. Reaper's hand was still on Jake's shoulder when his expression shifted from gratitude to something darker, more serious. The dangerous edge returned to his eyes. "We need to talk," Reaper said, his voice dropping. "Inside." Jake's relief evaporated. He followed Reaper back into the garage, Sophie rolling in behind them. 3 other bikers followed, their presence filling the small space with a sudden, heavy gravity. The garage door rolled down, cutting off the sun and the noise. Reaper stood in the center of the garage, arms crossed. "You did something today that matters," he began, voice measured. "You fixed my girl when nobody else could. That means something." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "But you also disrespected 40 grand of expert work. You made engineers look like fools. You made me look like a fool for trusting them." Jake's mind raced, searching for a defense. "So here's the deal," Reaper said, pulling a folded paper from his vest pocket. He set it on the workbench with deliberate precision. "You're going to fix every broken wheelchair, walker, and mobility device in our community. For free. For free." The words were a physical blow. Jake's garage was drowning. He opened his mouth to protest, but Reaper held up a hand. "Your community?" Jake managed, voice tight. Reaper unfolded the paper. It was a handwritten list, dozens of names. "There's 127 disabled vets in Mesa and Chandler," he said, his voice softening just a fraction. "Brothers who served, got hurt, and came home to a system that doesn't give a damn. The VA gives them garbage equipment, cheap bids, broken promises." He tapped the list. "They sacrificed everything, and their government thanks them with pain." He looked directly at Jake. "You fix Sophie. Now you fix them." Jake stared at the list. 127 people. 127 lives. "I can't work for free," he said, hating how desperate it sounded. "I have rent. I need to eat." "We'll supply everything," Reaper interrupted. "Materials, tools, parts. You supply the skill. You supply the time." He stepped closer. "We take care of our own. And as of right now, Jake, you're one of ours." One of the bikers, an older man with a scarred face and a vacant pant leg, stepped forward. "Name's Marcus," he said, voice rough. "Lost my legs in Fallujah. Been in a chair 8 years. The wheels don't track. My shoulders are shot. Doctors say that's just how it is." Another stepped up, younger, with a pronounced limp. "Tommy. Blown hip outside Mosul. They gave me a walker that's too short. Kills my back every day. They kept coming. Names, stories, injuries, abandonment, Marines, Army, Air Force. A brotherhood of the broken, failed by the system they defended. Jake looked at Sophie. She nodded slowly, her eyes saying, "You can do this." He looked back at the list, at the faces watching him. These were his people, maybe the only people he had left. "When do we start?" Jake asked. Marcus grinned, the scars on his face stretching. "Brother," he said, "we start now." Jake's first repair for a veteran uncovers a shocking truth. The faulty equipment wasn't an accident, but the result of a deliberate, money-saving VA policy. And the man who authorized it is someone Reaper knows all too well. Day one began before the sun finished rising. Marcus's wheelchair was first, a bulky, government-issue clunker with mismatched wheels and a frayed seat. Jake approached it with the same systematic focus he'd used on Sophie's chair. This wasn't just a repair, it was an autopsy. He had Marcus roll forward a few feet. The chair pulled hard to the left, forcing Marcus to muscle the right wheel with his shoulder just to go straight. 8 years of that. No wonder the man's shoulders were wrecked. "Let's get you up on the bench," Jake said, helping Marcus transfer to a stool. He then hoisted the wheelchair onto his hydraulic lift, one of the new pieces of equipment the Brotherhood had brought in, and began his examination. The problem was both simple and infuriating. The wheels weren't just misaligned. They were from 2 different manufacturers, slightly different diameters, a difference of maybe 1/8 of an inch. A VA procurement officer had likely ordered parts from the lowest bidder, mixing and matching without a second thought. To a bureaucrat, a wheel was a wheel. To a man like Marcus, it was a daily sentence of pain. As Jake dismantled the axle assembly, his fingers brushed against a stamped serial number on the frame. Next to it, almost faded away, was a small sticker, lot number 7812, inspected and cleared by VA Procurement Department 6. Officer R. Thorne. Jake frowned. He'd seen that name before. He pulled out his phone, a cheap burner with a cracked screen, and searched. It took a minute on the slow garage Wi-Fi, but a local news article from 2 years ago loaded. VA Regional Procurement Officer Roland Thorne honored for cost-saving initiatives. The article praised Thorne for streamlining equipment acquisition and reducing wasteful expenditure. Streamlining, Jake muttered. He looked at the mismatched wheels. This wasn't streamlining. This was sabotage. He didn't mention it to Marcus, not yet. Instead, he got to work. He sourced 2 matching, high-grade wheels from the new inventory the Brotherhood had supplied, machined a new axle to precise specifications, and rebuilt the bearing casings from scratch. It took 4 hours. When he was done, the chair rolled smooth and true, a straight line with barely a touch. "All right, Marcus. Let's try it." Marcus lowered himself into the chair, his movements stiff with anticipated pain. He placed his hands on the rims, took a breath, and pushed. The chair rolled forward in a perfect, silent line. No pull. No fight. Marcus kept rolling, past the garage door, into the parking lot. He didn't stop, didn't correct, just rolled. Then he slowed to a stop, his head bowed. His broad shoulders began to shake. He rolled back to Jake, tears cutting clean lines through the dust on his face. Without a word, he pulled a chain from under his shirt, his dog tags. He pressed the worn metal into Jake's greasy palm. "You earned these, brother," Marcus said, his voice raw. "More than I ever did." Jake tried to hand them back. "I can't take these." "You already did," Marcus said, closing Jake's fingers around them. "You carried the weight. Now you carry the proof." Day 2 was Tommy and his too-short walker. Day 3 brought a flood of new equipment from the Brotherhood, professional-grade tools, welding gear, shelving units. They transformed Jake's crumbling garage into a real shop. Reaper himself installed LED lighting, while Sophie organized parts with a meticulous eye. And with every repair, Jake saw the same sticker. Lot number 7812. Officer R. Thorne. It was on a walker with non-adjustable legs, on a wheelchair with a seat pan that dug into the user's thighs, on a set of crutches with poorly placed hand grips that caused nerve damage. Every piece of equipment was a monument to cost-cutting indifference, all signed off by the same man. On the afternoon of the fourth day, as Jake was welding a reinforcement plate onto a veteran's knee brace, Reaper walked over, 2 coffees in hand. He handed one to Jake. "You're quiet," Reaper observed, leaning against the workbench. Jake wiped sweat from his brow. "I keep seeing a name on the equipment. Roland Thorne, VA procurement." Reaper's expression didn't change, but his eyes went cold. "I know that name." "You do?" A long pause. "He's my brother-in-law." The welding torch hissed in Jake's hand. He quickly shut it off. "What?" "My sister's husband," Reaper said, his voice flat. "A suit. A numbers man. Thinks he's saving the taxpayer money." He took a slow sip of coffee. "We don't talk. Haven't in years. Not since the accident." "Sophie's accident?" Reaper nodded, staring into the middle distance. Roland was driving. He walked away without a scratch. Sophie didn't. He sent a check. A big one. Paid for that first chair. Thought money fixed everything. His knuckles were white around the coffee cup. "I told him the only thing I wanted from him was to stay the hell away from my family." Jake's mind connected the dots with a sickening click. The chair Sophie had, the one I rebuilt. Was it from a VA lot? Reaper's head snapped up. "No. That was private. Specialists in California." "But the parts, the design flaws." Jake walked to his computer, pulling up the specs he'd downloaded for Sophie's original chair. He cross-referenced them with the VA equipment manuals, now littering his desk. "Look here. The battery mount design. The joint articulation specs. They're identical to the VA issue models. The private firm must have subcontracted or used the same blueprints. They just made it shinier." Reaper's face darkened with a storm of fury. "Are you telling me," he said, each word precise and deadly, "that the chair that hurt my girl for 2 years was built on the same cheap, broken design my brother-in-law approves for veterans?" Jake scrolled, pointing. "Same part numbers in the schematic. Same weight distribution calculations. It's the same chair, Reaper, just with a titanium shell and a $40,000 price tag." The silence in the garage was absolute. The other bikers had stopped working. Sophie, who had been sorting nuts and bolts, was frozen, listening. Reaper set his coffee down so carefully the cup didn't make a sound. He looked at Sophie, his eyes filled with a terrible, guilty understanding. Her suffering wasn't just an accident of bad engineering. It was a symptom of a system personified by a man in his own family. "He didn't just fail veterans," Reaper whispered, the words thick with rage. "He failed her. With my money." Jake saw the murder in Reaper's eyes. This wasn't about business anymore. This was blood. "What are you going to do?" Jake asked quietly. Reaper looked at him, then at the wall of photos, the growing gallery of veterans Jake had helped. His gaze finally landed on Sophie. "I'm going to pay him a visit," Reaper said, "but not with my fists." A cold, calculated smile touched his lips. "We're going to use what he values most. His reputation. And his spreadsheets." Reaper's plan to expose his brother-in-law isn't about violence. It's about proof. And he needs Jake to come with him to the VA offices to get it. But when they arrive, they discover Thorne isn't just cutting corners. He's covering up something far worse. Reaper's plan was cold, precise, and involved no violence, at least, not the physical kind. They would ambush Roland Thorne with facts. A public reckoning. 2 days later, Jake found himself riding shotgun in Reaper's truck, a box of condemned equipment on the seat between them. Sophie's original wheelchair battery mount. Marcus's mismatched wheels. Tommy's 2 short walker legs. All tagged with their lot number 7812 stickers. "He works out of the regional VA office in Phoenix," Reaper said, his hands tight on the wheel. "Board meeting today. All the bigwigs. Perfect audience." Jake felt uneasy. "You sure this is the play? Storming a government building?" "We're not storming. We're delivering a public service announcement." Reaper's smile was thin. "With a loudspeaker." They parked in the visitor lot of a sleek, modern building that looked nothing like Jake's crumbling garage. Government efficiency in glass and steel. Jake carried the box, feeling wildly out of place in his oil-stained jeans among the suits and polished shoes. The lobby security guard, a retired-looking man with a kind face, stood up as they approached. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Reaper didn't break stride. "We have a delivery for Procurement Officer Roland Thorne. For the board meeting. It's evidence." The guard's eyes widened at the word evidence. He reached for his phone. "I'll need to call that in." "We'll save you the time," Reaper said, his voice calm, but leaving no room for argument. He led the way to the elevators, Jake following, the guard sputtering behind them. They rode to the 4th floor. The doors opened onto a hushed, carpeted hallway. A sign pointed to Conference Room B, Quarterly Procurement Review. Reaper pushed the double doors open without knocking. The room fell silent. A long table was surrounded by a dozen men and women in suits. PowerPoint slides were frozen on a screen behind them, graphs showing millions saved. At the head of the table sat a man in his late 40s, with thinning hair and a smug, polished demeanor. Roland Thorne. His eyes locked with Reaper's, and all the color drained from his face. "Reaper," he stammered, standing up. "This is a private meeting." "It's about to get very public," Reaper said. He nodded to Jake. "Show them." Jake set the box on the conference table with a heavy thud. He pulled out the battery mount, holding it up. "This is from a custom wheelchair that cost $40,000. The battery was mounted here." He pointed, putting 47 pounds of direct pressure on the user's spine. "Chronic pain guaranteed. The design specs match VA Lot 7812. He tossed it on the table. It landed with a clatter. He pulled out the mismatched wheels. These were on a veteran's chair for 8 years. Different diameters. He destroyed his shoulders compensating. From the same lot. One by one, he laid the broken, painful artifacts on the polished wood. A walker. A set of crutches. A knee brace. Each one tagged. The other board members stared, some in shock, some in dawning horror. Thorne regained some composure, his lawyerly instincts kicking in. "This is highly inappropriate. These are approved, inspected models. You can't just barge in here with scrap metal and make wild accusations." "Wild." Reaper's voice was dangerously quiet. He walked to the front of the room and picked up a remote. He clicked to the next slide. It was a photo of Sophie, taken just after her accident, pale and broken in a hospital bed. A collective gasp went through the room. "This is my daughter, Sophie. Your niece, Roland. The chair that hurt her for 2 years used your specs, your cost-saving designs. You sold my sister and me a $40,000 coffin on wheels." Thorne's mouth opened and closed. That was a private vendor. California specialists. I had nothing to do with that. You approved the foundational designs they subcontracted." Reaper boomed, his control finally snapping. "You built a system where the lowest bid wins, and human beings lose. You hurt veterans, and you hurt my girl." He clicked again. The screen now showed the wall of photos from Jake's garage, the 47 veterans helped so far, their names and stories. "These are the people you failed. These are the lives your spreadsheets broke." The room was in chaos. One board member, an older woman with a stern face, stood. "Officer Thorne, is this true? Did our procurement specs get used in private, high-cost equipment?" The designs are open source for approved manufacturers, cost-sharing initiatives." Thorne was floundering. Jake saw his opening. He reached into the box one last time. He pulled out a single sheet of paper, a printout he'd found buried in a VA parts catalog online. He held it up. "It's worse than that," Jake said, his mechanics calm cutting through the noise. He pointed to a line at the bottom of the spec sheet. "Look here. Design optimized for manufacturability and cost. User tolerance for discomfort not to exceed 6.5 on standard pain scale." He let the words hang. "You didn't just design for cost. You designed for pain. You built in a permissible amount of suffering." The stern-faced board member snatched the paper from Jake's hands. She read it, her face hardening into granite. She looked at Thorne. "You approved a specification that quantifies acceptable pain for veterans?" Thorne had no answer. He sank into his chair, deflated. Reaper walked to the table, leaning over his brother-in-law. "You're done, Roland. You're going to resign today. You're going to issue a full recall on every piece of equipment from Lot 7812 and every spec derived from it. And you're going to personally fund the retrofits for every veteran you hurt." He leaned closer, his voice a whisper only Thorne could hear. "Or the next visit won't be from me. It'll be from every brother you wronged. And they won't bring paperwork." It was over. The board erupted into action, already calling for emergency sessions, auditors, damage control. Reaper turned and walked out, Jake following. They didn't speak until they were back in the truck. "You did good, mechanic," Reaper said, starting the engine. "What happens now?" Jake asked. "Now," Reaper said, pulling out of the lot, "we get to work for real. With that recall, we're about to have hundreds of chairs to fix." He glanced at Jake. "You ready?" Jake looked at his grease-stained hands. He thought of Sophie's smile, of Marcus's dog tags in his pocket, of the wall of photos growing in his garage. For the first time in years, the path ahead wasn't a dead end. It was a road. "Yeah," Jake said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "I'm ready." The recall makes Jake a hero, but it also paints a target on his back. The private medical supplier who built Sophie's chair isn't going down without a fight, and they send a message to Jake he can't ignore. The fallout was immediate and national. Roland Thorne's resignation hit the news by evening. By morning, headlines screamed, "VA scandal. Officer approved pain-tolerant designs for veterans." Recall notices for Lot 7812 equipment were issued within 48 hours. Jake's garage, Martinez Mobility Solutions, became ground zero for the fix. Veterans started arriving not just from Mesa, but from across the state. The Brotherhood's network kicked into overdrive. Bikers with trailers and trucks delivered broken chairs and walkers from as far as Tucson and Flagstaff. The humble garage was now a bustling field hospital for machinery. Sophie became the de facto quartermaster and triage nurse. She'd greet each veteran, listen to their story, and tag their equipment with a priority level. Jake worked 18-hour days, his hands moving on muscle memory, his mind solving one painful puzzle after another. Reaper handled logistics, Marcus organized the incoming part shipments, and Tommy managed a growing team of bikers learning basic repairs. It felt like a victory. It felt like a revolution. Then, on the 8th day after the recall, the first warning arrived. Jake was under a wheelchair, replacing a shredded bearing, when he heard the roar of an engine that didn't belong. It wasn't the familiar rumble of a Harley. This was a high-pitched, angry snarl, a sports bike. It skidded to a stop just outside the open bay door. The rider, dressed in black leathers, with no patches, killed the engine. He removed his helmet, revealing a sharp, clean-shaven face and cold eyes. He didn't look like a biker or a veteran. He looked like corporate. "Jake Riker?" the man asked, his voice flat. Jake slid out from under the chair, wiping his hands. "That's me." The man reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. He held it out, not stepping further into the garage. "On behalf of Apex Mobility Solutions." Apex, the California firm that had built Sophie's original chair. Jake took the envelope. It was heavy, expensive paper. He tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of letterhead and a glossy brochure. The letter was from Apex's legal department. "To Mr. Jacob Riker. Asterisk, it has come to our attention that you have been making unauthorized modifications to proprietary Apex mobility equipment, specifically model #X7, titanium custom, serial hashtag. Your public disparagement of our engineering has caused significant and quantifiable reputational and financial damage. Asterisk. Cease and desist all modification of Apex products immediately. Remove all related defamatory content from public forums and media. You are hereby given 72 hours to issue a formal, public retraction of your statements regarding the X7 model's design integrity. Failure to comply will result in immediate legal action for tortious interference, defamation, and violation of intellectual property rights. Sincerely, Legal Department, Apex Mobility Solutions." Jake looked from the letter to the man, who was watching him with a faint, smug smile. "You rebuilt their flagship product and called it a torture device on national news." The man said, "They're not happy. Sign the retraction, walk away, and this disappears." From behind Jake, Reaper's voice cut through the garage air like a blade. Or what? The Apex Man's smile didn't falter as Reaper, Marcus, and two other brothers moved into the doorway, blocking the light. Or we sue him into oblivion. He'll lose his garage, his tools, everything. And then, the man's eyes flicked to Reaper. We sue your club for conspiracy, harassment, RICO charges. We have very good lawyers. Reaper stepped forward, coming toe-to-toe with the messenger. You tell your bosses something. We don't respond well to threats. It's not a threat. It's a forecast. The man pulled a phone from his pocket, tapped it, and held it up. On the screen was a live feed. It showed Jake's small house on the edge of town. A white van was parked across the street. We're thorough. We know where he lives. We know where she lives. The screen changed to show Sophie's high school, zooming in on the front gates. A cold fury washed over Jake, colder than any fear. Reaper's hand shot out and grabbed the man's wrist, squeezing until the foam clattered to the concrete. You listen to me, Reaper growled, his face inches from the other man's. You touch one hair on that girl's head, or set one foot on his property, and your very good lawyers will be arranging your funeral. This isn't a boardroom. This is the desert. And out here, things disappear. For the first time, the smug confidence in the Apex Man's eyes flickered. He yanked his arm back, rubbing his wrist. You have 72 hours, he repeated, but the bravado was gone. He snatched his phone from the ground, jammed his helmet on, and kicked his bike to life, roaring away in a cloud of dust. The garage was silent. Sophie had come out from the back office, her face pale. They can't do that, can they? She asked quietly. The lawsuit. Jake looked at the letter, then at the wall of veterans' photos. They can try. They have money. They have patents. And I modified their product without authorization. You fixed their mistake, Sophie said, her voice rising. Legally, that might not matter, Jake said, the weight of it settling on him. He could fight the VA. But $1 billion private corporation with a team of lawyers? His gut twisted. He could lose it all. The garage, the mission, everything. Reaper picked up the fallen brochure. It showed the X7 chair, gleaming under studio lights. They're not scared of the lawsuit, he said slowly, his eyes narrowing. They're scared of the truth getting out. If you back down, their secret stays safe. If you fight, he looked at Jake. We need better ammunition than a recall. We need their blueprint, the original design specs that show they knew it was flawed. How do we get that? Marcus asked. Break into their office. No, Sophie said. Everyone turned to her. She was looking at the brochure in Reaper's hand, her mind working. They wouldn't keep the damning evidence lying around. But there's always a paper trail. Engineers, draftsmen, someone who objected. She met Jake's eyes. The person who designed it didn't want it to hurt people. Someone along the line made a choice to cut corners. We find that person. Jake thought of the note he'd found in her chair. Someone please help. It hurts. The plea of the user. What about the plea of the designer who was forced to build it wrong? How? Jake asked. Sophie walked to Jake's computer, her fingers flying over the keyboard. She pulled up the Apex website, clicked on careers, then engineering. She scrolled through profiles of smiling engineers. She stopped on one, a woman in her 40s, with intelligent eyes and a slight, uncomfortable smile. Dr. Eris Thorne. The last name hit them all like a thunderclap. Thorne. Jake breathed. Sophie zoomed in on the profile. Dr. Eris Thorne, Ph.D. Biomedical Engineering. Lead designer, X7 series. Former VA contract liaison. Roland's sister, Reaper said, his voice hollow. My other sister. The pieces slammed together. A family business of betrayal. Roland approving the cheap VA specs. Eris using those same specs to build a luxury product. The Thorns getting rich while veterans and a teenage girl paid the price in pain. She's the key, Sophie said, her voice firm. If anyone has the original, unaltered designs, it's her. If she has a conscience. Reaper stared at the photo of his sister, a mix of betrayal and desperate hope on his face. I haven't spoken to her in 10 years. He looked at Jake. But for this, I'll make the call. Contacting Eris Thorne is a gamble. She could be her brother's accomplice, or she could be their only hope. When she agrees to meet in secret, she doesn't bring blueprints. She brings a warning. Apex isn't just suing. They're coming to destroy Jake's garage for good. Reaper's call to his sister, Eris, was brief and tense. She agreed to meet, but not at the garage, not at her office. She chose a neutral, public space, a diner on the highway halfway between Phoenix and Mesa, the kind of place with sticky vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like burnt tires. Jake and Reaper went alone. Sophie had insisted on coming, but Reaper put his foot down. If this goes sideways, you're not anywhere near it. The look in his eyes brooked no argument. They slid into a corner booth, back to the wall. Reaper's gaze constantly swept the room. Jake felt exposed. His mechanic's hands clenched around a menu he wasn't reading. At exactly 3 p.m., the bell over the door chimed. A woman entered, looking nothing like her corporate headshot. Dr. Eris Thorne was in her mid-40s, with tired eyes and hair pulled into a messy bun. She wore jeans and a faded sweatshirt, not a lab coat. She spotted them and walked over, sliding into the booth, without a word. For a long moment, the three of them just sat there, siblings separated by a chasm of choices. Reaper, Eris finally said, her voice softer than Jake expected. Eris. She glanced at Jake. You're the mechanic. I am. She nodded, folding her hands on the table. Her knuckles were white. I saw the news. About Roland. And about the girl. Her eyes flicked to Reaper. You're Sophie. I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't unbreak her spine, Reaper said, his voice low and controlled. Or undo 2 years of pain. I know. She took a shaky breath. You think I don't know? I designed the core architecture for the X7. It was supposed to be revolutionary. Light, responsive, truly adaptive. Her eyes filled with a bit of shame. Then the board saw the VA's Lot 7812 specs. The same specs Roland pushed through. They were cheaper, more manufacturing-friendly. They ordered me to integrate them. I argued. I showed them the stress simulations, the pain projections. They showed me the profit margins. Jake leaned forward. You knew it would hurt people. I told them it would hurt people, she hissed, then lowered her voice, glancing around. I filed formal objections. I have the emails, the memos, the original CAD files, with my notes attached. They buried it all. They said if I didn't like it, I could leave. And I had a mortgage, kids in college. She looked at her brother, her eyes pleading. I sold out. I know I did. I told myself it was just a chair. But then I saw your daughter on the news, talking about the pain. It was my design, my failure. She reached into her large purse and pulled out a slim, silver external hard drive. She slid it across the table to Jake. Everything is on here. The original, ethical designs. The board's orders to use the VA specs. The cost-benefit analyses, where they literally weighed projected user discomfort against per-unit savings. It's all time-stamped, authenticated. Jake's hand closed over the cool metal. This was it. The blueprint of the betrayal. But it's too late for just evidence, Eris said, her voice dropping to a whisper. You pissed off the wrong people. The lawsuit is just the start. Apex has a team. They call it asset protection. They're not lawyers. They're fixers. They're coming to Mesa tonight. Reaper went still. Coming for what? To make an example, she said, her face pale. They're going to trash your garage. Destroy your tools, your materials, all the equipment you fixed. They want to erase your capability to help anyone. And they want to send a message. Cross Apex, and you lose everything. Jake's blood ran cold. His garage, the veterans' chairs, the mission, all of it. Why are you telling us this? Reaper asked, searching his sister's face. Because I helped build one prison, she said, tears finally spilling over. I won't help them build another. Get your people out of there. Tonight. There's nothing in that building worth dying for. Reaper looked at Jake, a silent question hanging between them. Run or fight? Jake thought of the wall of photos, of Marcus's dog tags in his pocket, of Sophie's smile when she first rolled in the rebuilt chair. This wasn't just a building. It was a promise. "We're not running," Jake said, his voice quiet but absolute. Eris stared at him, then at her brother. She saw the same resolve in Reaper's eyes. She closed her eyes in resignation. "Then you'd better be ready. They'll come after dark. For men. They'll have tools, not for repair, for demolition." She stood up, throwing a 20 on the table for coffee she never drank. "I've done all I can. Don't contact me again." She turned to leave, then paused, looking back at Reaper. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you found someone who could fix what I broke." Then she was gone, the diner bell chiming softly behind her. Back in the truck, the hard drive felt like a live grenade in Jake's lap. "We call the cops," Jake said. Reaper shook his head, starting the engine. "And say what?" "That a corporate asset protection team, which doesn't officially exist, is coming to vandalize a garage." "With what proof?" "My sisters here say. They'll be in and out before a patrol car even thinks about rolling." "So what do we do?" A slow, grim smile spread across Reaper's face, the smile of a tactician seeing the battlefield. "We give them a welcome party. On our terms." He pulled out his phone, hitting a speed dial. "Marcus, round up the brothers. Everyone who's within 50 miles. Tell them to bring their tools. Not the wrenches. The other tools. We've got pests to exterminate." By sunset, the garage was transformed. The valuable equipment, the veterans' chairs, the new tools, were loaded into Brotherhood trucks and moved to a secure storage unit. What remained was a stage. The brothers arrived, not on their roaring Harleys, but in quiet trucks and vans. They moved with a disciplined silence Jake had never seen in them before. These weren't just bikers. They were veterans of a different kind of war. They set up positions inside the garage office, on the roof of the adjacent auto parts store, in the shadows of the alley. Jake was given a place at the window of the office, overlooking the bay door. Reaper handed him a heavy Maglite flashlight. "Your job is light. Ours is persuasion." The night deepened. The desert chill seeped into the empty garage. Tension stretched wire-tight. Then, at 1:17 a.m., headlights flickered at the end of the street. A plain white panel van, just like the one from the phone feed, rolled to a silent stop 2 blocks away. For figures dressed in dark clothing emerged, carrying heavy duffel bags. They moved with a professional, confident efficiency toward the garage. One used a lockpick on the side door. It clicked open. They slipped inside. Now, Jake hit the switch. Every light in the garage blazed on at once. The new LED strips, the overhead halogens, portable work lights the brothers had rigged. The 4 men froze, blinded. From the shadows, the Iron Brotherhood emerged. Not yelling, not charging, just stepping into the light, forming a solid wall of leather, denim, and silent intent. Reaper stood at the front, arms crossed. The lead intruder, a big man with a shaved head, lowered his sledgehammer, a smirk on his face. "A bike club? You gonna call your mommies?" Reaper didn't move. "You're on private property, with tools of destruction. That's a felony. Prove it." The man sneered. That's when Sophie's voice, amplified by a small PA speaker from the roof, rang out clear in the night. "We're live on 3 social media streams, and this is being recorded for the Mesa Police Department. Case file already opened. Smile. You're on camera." High-resolution security cameras, installed that very afternoon, panned silently, their red recording lights glowing. The smirk vanished from the leader's face. This wasn't a back-alley beatdown. It was a trap. "You set us up," he snarled. Reaper took 1 step forward. "You work for Apex. You came to destroy a place that helps wounded veterans. We're just giving you the audience you deserve." He gestured to the doors. "The police are 4 minutes out. You can wait for them, with the evidence, or you can run back to your bosses and tell them they lost. Their move." The 4 men exchanged panicked looks. The calculus had changed. This was public. This was documented. They dropped their tools with a clatter and bolted for the door, shoving past the brothers who parted just enough to let them through. The white vent screeched away into the night. The garage erupted in low chuckles and backslaps. They'd won without throwing a punch. Reaper walked over to Jake, clapping a heavy hand on his shoulder. "Now we use the hard drive," he said. "We send their own blueprint for destruction to every news outlet in the country. Not just a recall, a murder weapon in data form." Jake looked around the garage, still standing, still his. He held up the silver drive. "Let's finish this." Releasing the damning data makes Jake and the Brotherhood heroes, but it also unleashes Apex's final, most dangerous play. They go after the one person Jake couldn't protect, Sophie. And this time, they don't send lawyers or thugs. They send someone from the inside. The data dump was a nuclear option. Reaper's contacts in indie media and Jake's newfound local fame created a perfect storm. The files from Eris's hard drive didn't just leak, they exploded. Headlines shifted from VA scandal to corporate malice, Apex designed for pain. The original engineering objections, the board's cold cost-benefit memos, the direct link to the VA's faulty specs, it was all there, in black and white. Apex's stock plummeted. Federal investigations were announced. The lawsuit against Jake was quietly dropped. For a week, it felt like total victory. The garage was busier than ever, now a symbol of resistance. Donations poured in from across the country, allowing Jake to buy better equipment, hire 2 part-time mechanics from the veteran community, and even start a small fund to help vets with non-mobility expenses. Sophie was their public face, giving interviews with a poised clarity that belied her age. She talked about design empathy, about listening to the user, about her own journey, from pain to purpose. She was radiant, strong, walking more each day with her custom crutches. That's why the attack, when it came, was so perfectly cruel. They didn't go for the garage. They didn't go for Jake. They went for her hope. 2 hours after her appointment was supposed to end, Jake's phone rang. It was the clinic administrator, her voice tight with concern. "Mr. Riker?" Sophie's session ended over an hour ago. She said her father was picking her up, but she's still sitting in our lobby. She's not herself. She won't speak. She just asked for you. A cold dread settled in Jake's gut. "I'm on my way." He roared across town in his beat-up truck, fear making his hands slick on the wheel. He found her in a sterile waiting room, sitting rigid in her chair, staring blankly at a potted plant. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow. "Sophie." She flinched at his voice, then looked up. The light in her eyes, the fierce, joyful light that had returned after the chair rebuild, was gone, extinguished. "Jake," she whispered. Her voice was flat, dead. "What happened? Are you hurt?" She shook her head slowly. "The new therapist, Dr. Vance. He was evaluating my progress." She took a shuddering breath. "He said the improvements were remarkable. A miracle, even." She looked down at her hands. "Then he said it was temporary, a physiological fluke, that my spinal injury was degenerative, that the reduced pain from the new chair was masking the inevitable decline, that in 6 months, maybe a year, I'd likely regress, possibly worse than before." The words hung in the air, each one a hammer blow. Jake's mind reeled. "That's not what your doctor said. Your scans were stable." "He had new scans," Sophie said, her voice breaking. "He showed me, compared them to my old ones. There were markers. He said my original team was overly optimistic, that they gave me false hope." A tear finally spilled over. He said chasing this miracle mechanic narrative was dangerous, that I was setting myself up for a devastating psychological crash when my body failed. The cruelty of it was surgical. They hadn't attacked her body. They'd attacked her future. They'd weaponized medical authority to destroy the hope Jake had helped rebuild. "Where is he?" Jake asked, his voice dangerously calm. "He left after our session. He's not a full-time staffer. A consultant." A consultant. The word was a trigger. Jake pulled out his phone and searched Dr. Vance Scottsdale PT. Nothing. He searched the clinic's website. No Dr. Vance listed. He called Reaper. 20 minutes later, Reaper stormed into the lobby, his face a mask of fury. He'd already been on the phone. "The clinic has no record of a Dr. Vance being scheduled today. They have no consultant by that name. The front desk says he showed credentials and paperwork, said he was covering for Sophie's regular therapist, who was out sick. They believed him. It was a ghost. A professionally crafted ghost. Apex, Reaper growled, the word dripping with venom. This is their style. Psychological warfare. They couldn't beat us with lawyers or thugs, so they're trying to break her spirit. Sophie looked between them, the devastation complete. So he was lying. The scans. Had to be, Jake said. But a seed of doubt had been planted in him, too. What if he was wrong? What if his fixes were just a band-aid on a terminal wound? He pushed the thought away. Sophie, listen to me. We will get you real scans. We will get 3 more opinions. But you have to believe this. That man was not there to help you. Getting her home was a somber affair. The vibrant girl was gone, replaced by a shell. She went straight to her room and closed the door. In the garage office, Reaper slammed his fist on the desk. I will burn their whole company to the ground. That's what they want, Jake said, thinking aloud. They want you to rage, to do something stupid and violent, to invalidate everything we've built. They want her to give up. Marcus, who had been listening quietly from his wheelchair, spoke up. Money like that, transferred to a crook like Vance, it doesn't go wire transfer. It's cash. Hand-delivered. Someone had to carry it. He looked around at the brothers. We know people who move in those circles. The kind of people who act as bags for corporate dirty work. It's a small, ugly world. Reaper nodded, a plan solidifying. We ask around. Discreetly. Find the bagman. The Brotherhood's network, built on decades of loyalty and shared secrets, was a weapon no corporate fixer could comprehend. Within 48 hours, they had a name. Leo the Courier Foss. A nondescript man who specialized in discreet, untraceable deliveries for a certain clientele. And word was, he'd recently done a job for Suits from California. They found Foss not in a shadowy alley, but at a putt-putt golf course, sipping a soda in the shade. He was a small, nervous man who jumped when Reaper and 2 brothers quietly surrounded his bench. We're not here to hurt you, Leo, Reaper said, his voice calm. We just want to talk about a delivery, $15,000 in cash, to a man named Vance. Foss's eyes darted around, looking for an escape that wasn't there. I don't know anything. One of the brothers, a massive man named Tiny, casually picked up a nearby putter and bent it into a perfect U-shape with his bare hands. He set it gently on the bench next to Foss. We think you do, Reaper said. Foss broke. It was fast and messy. He'd been hired through an anonymous encrypted message, but the drop-off for the cash had been at a private airport hangar outside Phoenix. The man who gave him the envelope was a corporate security type. Foss, being paranoid, had taken a picture with his phone, a grainy, long-distance shot of the man getting into a car. The car had a license plate. It took Carla's investigator less than a day to run the plate. The car was a rental, paid for by a corporate credit card belonging to Apex Mobility's head of security. Bingo. Carla presented the new evidence, the photo, the license plate trace, the link to Foss's statement, and the CGS Holdings connection, to the DA in a tense meeting. She argued that this proved Apex had orchestrated the entire fraud, then framed the Brotherhood to cover it up. The DA, facing a case that was now a tangled mess of mutually assured destruction, made a call. She offered Apex a deal, drop all charges against Reaper and Jake, and she would quietly bury the new evidence of their fraud and framing attempt. A stalemate. Apex, its stock already in freefall and its reputation in tatters, accepted. The public would never know the full depth of their scheme, but they would walk away, crippled. The lawsuit vanished. The police investigation closed. The war was over, not with a bang, but with a bitter, quiet truce. Back at the garage, under the string lights now hung for a nightly gathering, the mood was victorious, but somber. They'd won, but they'd seen how deep the enemy was willing to dig. Sophie stood, leaning on her crutches, and raised a bottle of root beer. They tried to break us with lawyers, with thugs, with lies, and with fear, she said, her voice clear and strong. They failed. Because what we have isn't a business. It's a family. And you can't sue that. You can't scare it. You can only join it. The gathered brothers and veterans cheered. Jake looked at Reaper, who gave him a slow, firm nod. They had weathered the storm. The garage stood. The mission lived. But as Jake looked out at the dark desert beyond the circle of light, he knew this wasn't an end. It was a new kind of beginning. They had made powerful enemies. And in the shadows, enemies have long memories. Peace is fragile. A month later, a federal agent arrives with a new offer. Help the government build a case against the corrupt military contracting world that spawned the VA and Apex scandals. The catch: Jake has to go undercover, and the first name on the target list is someone Reaper calls a brother. The peace held for a month. A fragile, busy, beautiful month. The garage, Martinez Mobility Solutions, was a hive of purposeful activity. Veterans came and went, their pain eased, their dignity restored. The wall of photos grew to 68 faces. Sophie started her first online course in biomedical engineering. Reaper smiled more. Then the federal agent arrived. She drove a government sedan, dusty from the desert roads, and looked as out of place as a cactus in a snowstorm. Special Agent Eliza Walsh, Department of Defense Inspector General's office. She wore a no-nonsense pantsuit and had eyes that missed nothing. She didn't go to the garage. She found Jake at his small house, just after sunrise, as he was loading tools into his truck. "Mr. Riker, I'm with the DODIG. We need to talk about your work." Jake's guard went up instantly. "I've had enough government talk to last a lifetime." "This isn't about you," Walsh said, her voice calm. "It's about the system that created the equipment that hurt Sophie Thorne and hundreds of veterans. The VA scandal, Apex, their symptoms. We're after the disease." She handed him a thin, sealed folder. Inside were names, companies, contract numbers. A web of connections between defense contractors, procurement officers, and private medical supply firms. At the center of the web was a company called Praetorian Armored Systems. They make body armor, vehicle armor, tactical equipment for the military. Walsh explained. 3 years ago, they diversified into civilian mobility solutions, a fancy term for buying up small medical device companies and applying their cost-effective manufacturing techniques. Jake scanned the documents. The same pattern emerged. Designs optimized for profit, not people. Substandard materials. Specifications that allowed for acceptable failure rates in medical equipment. It was Lot 7812 on a billion-dollar scale. "We've been building a RICO case for 2 years, Walsh said. "We have the paper. We need the people. We need someone on the inside who can get us a confession, a recording, a ledger. Someone who speaks the language of machines and can see the flaws they're trying to hide." Jake looked up, cold understanding dawning. "You want me to go undercover?" "You're perfect," she said bluntly. "A decorated veteran mechanic with a public history of exposing faults. Praetorian is hiring for a new quality assurance liaison position at their Phoenix prototyping lab. It's a made-for-you cover. You go in, you do what you do, find the flaws. But instead of fixing them in a garage, you document who ordered them, who signed off, who profited." The weight of it was immense. It was everything he'd been fighting, but from the inside. It was dangerous. It was necessary. "What's the catch?" Jake asked, already knowing. Walsh's expression tightened. "The head of their Phoenix division. The man you'd be reporting to. His name is Gareth Crow." The name meant nothing to Jake. He shook his head. "He goes by Grip," Walsh added quietly. Jake's blood went cold. Grip. He knew that name. An Iron Brotherhood patch from a chapter in Nevada. A man Reaper had ridden with years ago, before a falling out over business choices. A man Reaper still, in the complicated way of the Brotherhood, called a brother. "You're asking me to spy on one of Reaper's old brothers," Jake said, his voice flat. "We're asking you to help put a corrupt man who's harming veterans behind bars," Walsh corrected. "What's his loyalty worth against that?" Jake didn't answer. He told her he needed to think. He didn't go to the garage. He drove into the desert, the vast emptiness helping him think. He wrestled with it all day. The right thing was clear. Stop Praetorian. The personal cost was terrifying. Betray Reaper's trust. Risk the Brotherhood's wrath. Dive into a world of corporate spies and legal danger. At dusk, he went to Reaper's house, a modest place on the edge of town. He found him in the garage, polishing his bike. Jake didn't mince words. He laid out Walsh's offer, the folder, the target. Reaper listened in silence, his polishing rag going still. When Jake said the name Grip, Reaper's jaw clenched, a muscle ticking in his cheek. Gareth Crow, Reaper finally said, the name tasting foul. He left the club 10 years ago. Said he was going legit. Went into consulting. He spat the word. We heard rumors that his consulting was showing defense contractors how to cut corners the government wouldn't notice. He looked at Jake, his eyes hard. If he's at the heart of this, then he's no brother of mine. Not anymore. If I do this, Jake said, I'll be lying to him, using your name as my in. When it blows up, he'll know you were involved. It could start a war. Reaper was silent for a long time, staring at the gleaming chrome of his bike. There's already a war, he said finally. It's just been quiet. A war against guys like him in suits, who sell out soldiers for stock options. He met Jake's gaze. You do this. You get the proof. And when it's time, I want to be the one who brings him the news. It was permission. It was an alliance. Jake called Agent Walsh and accepted. The cover story was elegant. Jake, disillusioned with the spotlight and the struggle of his nonprofit, was seeking stable, well-paid work where his skills were appreciated. Reaper provided a reluctant, back-channel reference to Grip, vouching for Jake's mechanical genius and his pragmatic change of heart. A week later, Jake walked into the sleek, silent Phoenix prototyping lab of Praetorian Armored Systems. The air smelled of ozone and new plastic. He was given a badge, a lab coat, and a tour by a smiling HR rep. His new boss, Gareth Grip Crow, met him in a glass-walled office overlooking the lab floor. Crow was in his 50s, with a gym-built physique under an expensive shirt, and hands that still bore faded tattoo ink. His handshake was crushing. Reaper says you're the real deal, Crow said, his eyes assessing. Says you see what others miss. That's what we pay for here. We see problems before they become expensive. That's what I do, Jake said, keeping his voice neutral. Good. Crow gestured to the lab. You'll start on our new line of field-grade mobility chairs. Built for rugged use. Government contract. Your job is to find the weak points. Then, we discuss how to mitigate them. For cost. The way he said mitigate made Jake's skin crawl. It meant hide, not fix. Jake's first assignment was a wheelchair chassis designed for uneven terrain. He spent days on it, applying his meticulous process, and he found the flaw immediately. The stress points around the axle mounts were calculated wrong. Under heavy use, they'd crack. Not in testing, but in the field, after the warranty expired.
He wrote up his findings in a detailed report, as instructed. Then, using a tiny, encrypted recorder Walsh had provided, he went to Crow's office to deliver it verbally. Crow skimmed the report, a smile playing on his lips. Excellent work, Riker. The axle stress. You're right, of course. The original spec called for a titanium reinforcement here. He tapped the blueprint. Adds $300 per unit. Our client's budget is fixed. So, what's the mitigation? Jake asked, the wire hidden in his button feeling like a bomb. Crow leaned back. We changed the testing protocol. We run the stress test on a perfectly flat dynamometer, not on the 15-degree incline the spec requires. The numbers pass. The chair gets certified. The contract is fulfilled. He smiled, a cold, corporate smile. The end-user's experience is not our performance metric. The government's checkbox is. It was the confession, clear and cold. Jake had it. As he left the office, his heart hammering, Crow called after him. Oh, and Jake? Welcome to the real world, where winning isn't about fixing things. It's about knowing what you can get away with. Jake nodded, playing his part. Inside, he was already planning the downfall. He had the evidence. Now he just had to deliver it without getting caught. But as he walked back to his sterile workstation, he noticed Crow watching him through the glass wall, his expression no longer friendly, but curiously thoughtful. As if he, too, was seeing something others missed. Jake has the proof, but extracting it from the high-security lab is nearly impossible. His first attempt fails, triggering a lockdown and Crow's suspicion. Now, trapped inside with the evidence and a boss who's starting to connect the dots, Jake's only way out is the one person he's there to betray. The lockdown sirens blared, a piercing shriek that killed all other sound in the Praetorian lab. Red lights strobed against the sterile, white walls. Security doors hissed shut with final metallic clunks, sealing Jake inside the prototyping bay with 4 other panicked engineers. Containment protocol activated. Unauthorized data transfer detected. Jake's heart slammed against his ribs. His first attempt to transmit the recorded confession had triggered a firewall alarm he hadn't known existed. The tiny data burst hadn't gone through. The evidence was still trapped in the recorder in his pocket, and he was trapped with it. Over the intercom, a calm, automated voice repeated, "Remain at your stations. Security personnel en route." Through the glass wall of his office, Gareth Grip Crow was already on his feet, not looking panicked but focused. His eyes swept the lab floor, methodically, like a predator scanning a field. They landed on Jake. The calculation in that gaze was terrifying. It wasn't the anger of a caught man. It was the cold assessment of a strategist whose game had just changed. The main lab door hissed open. 2 Praetorian internal security guards, armed and armored like private military, entered. "Everyone, hands on your workstations. No movement." Crow emerged from his office, holding up a hand to the guards. "Stand down, gentlemen. It's a system glitch. I'll handle this." His authority was absolute. The guards nodded, retreating to the door, but not leaving. Crow walked directly to Jake's station. He leaned in, his voice a low, pleasant rumble meant only for Jake's ears. "A data transfer attempt, right after our little chat. That's quite a coincidence, Riker." He picked up a stress gauge from Jake's bench, turning it over in his hands. "Reaper vouched for you. Said you were a pure mechanic. Just cared about the work." He set the tool down with a soft click. But a pure mechanic doesn't try to send encrypted packets from a secure server. Jake's mind raced. Denial was useless. He had to pivot. "The flaw was bigger than I wrote down," he said, keeping his voice steady, playing to his cover. "I found a cascade failure in the motor controller. It's not in the schematics. I was trying to send a diagnostic snapshot to my home server to model it. It's how I work. Deep focus. I wasn't thinking about protocols." Crow studied him, his eyes narrowing. It was a plausible lie, the obsessed technician breaking rules for a solution. Jake saw a flicker of doubt, but not enough. "Show me," Crow said. "Show me this cascade failure. Right now." It was a test. Jake had minutes to fabricate a convincing, critical flaw in a system he'd only just begun to fully understand. He nodded, turning to the wheelchair chassis on his stand. His hands moved, disassembling the motor housing, his mind working faster than his fingers. He talked about theoretical harmonic resonance, about substandard capacitors on the controller board, about a failure that would brick the chair after 200 hours of use, just outside the standard testing cycle. He was building a castle of lies, and Crow was listening, his head tilted. For a moment, Jake thought he'd bought it. Then Crow's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression iced over. He showed the screen to Jake. It was a security alert, a facial recognition match from the building's exterior cameras. The image was grainy but unmistakable. Reaper, sitting on his bike, parked in a lot across the street, watching the building. "Your reference is doing a drive-by," Crow murmured, his voice now devoid of all pretense. "Another coincidence?" The last shred of doubt vanished from his face, replaced by a cold, certain fury. "You're not here for a job. You're a plant." He didn't yell. He simply pocketed his phone and said to the guards by the door, "Mr. Riker and I are going to my private workshop to discuss a sensitive prototype issue. No interruptions." It wasn't a request. The guards nodded. "Walk with me, Jake," Crow said, his hand clamping onto Jake's bicep with a strength that belied his age. The grip was iron, painful. He guided Jake past the curious stares of the other engineers, down a side corridor marked authorized personnel only, and into a private elevator. He used a keycard. The elevator descended. The doors opened not onto another lab, but into what looked like a high-end custom motorcycle shop merged with an evidence locker. Gleaming bike frames sat next to shelves of classified-looking binders and secure server racks. This was Crow's sanctum, his real office. Crow released him, walking over to a tool cabinet. "You work for the feds? The DODIG? Or are you and Reaper running some kind of shakedown?" He pulled out a long, heavy-duty torque wrench, hefting it thoughtfully. "The chairs are death traps, Grip," Jake said, abandoning the act. "You know they are. You designed them to fail. I designed them to meet a budget." Crow snapped, the corporate calm finally cracking to reveal the angry biker underneath. "To win contracts. To keep this division profitable and thousands of people employed. You think you're a hero? You're a wrench in the machine. A naive, sentimental wrench." He took a step closer. "Where's the recorder, Jake? The one you tried to transmit from. Give it to me and you walk out of here. You go back to your pathetic garage and your feel-good mission." This never happened. Jake knew it was a lie. If he handed over the evidence, he'd never leave this underground room. He backed up, his eyes scanning for a weapon and exit. There was none. The elevator was locked. The only other door was a heavy fire exit, likely alarmed. His hand closed around the only thing on a nearby workbench, a small, ultra-bright LED trouble light on a coiled cord. "It's over, Grip," Jake said. "Even if you silence me, they know. The investigation is bigger than me." Crow's smile was pitiless. "Investigations need evidence. Without your little recording, it's your word against a billion-dollar corporation. And you're a disgruntled ex-employee who hacked our servers." He raised the torque wrench. "Last chance." The elevator panel behind Crow chimed. Both men froze. The elevator shouldn't work without Crow's keycard. The doors slid open. Reaper stood there, alone. He took in the scene. Jake backed against a wall, Crow with a raised wrench, in a single, flashing glance. His face showed no surprise. "Grip," Reaper said, his voice calm as desert stone. "Marcus," Crow replied, using Reaper's real name. The wrench didn't lower. "You vouch for a rat? He's not a rat. He's a mechanic. You just stopped him from fixing your mistakes." Reaper took a slow step into the room, his hands open at his sides. "It's done, Gareth. The feds have enough. They're outside. Jake walking out with that recorder is what keeps this from turning into a Waco situation." Crow laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You brought the feds to my door? After all we were?" "What we were died when you started selling broken gear to broken soldiers," Reaper said, his voice finally heating with anger. "You crossed a line. This isn't club business. This is about honor. Remember that." The word honor hung in the air. For a second, Crow's defiance wavered, revealing something old and tarnished underneath. The brother he used to be. It was the moment Jake needed. He lunged, not at Crow, but to the side, yanking the coiled cord of the trouble light. He smashed the blinding LED bulb against the wall, then hurled the sparking, shattered base at the bank of server racks. A shower of sparks erupted. An electrical fire alarm screamed to life overhead, 10 times louder than the lockdown siren. Sprinklers engaged, drenching the room in a chaotic, cold downpour. In the blinding spray and strobing alarm lights, Crow stumbled back, disoriented. "Now, Jake," Reaper yelled. Jake sprinted for the fire exit. He hit the bar. A different, air-splitting alarm sounded, but the door flew open, revealing a concrete staircase leading up. Reaper was right behind him. They took the stairs 2 at a time, emerging into a blinding Arizona afternoon behind the building. Federal cars were indeed there, Agent Walsh standing by one, along with a squad of Mesa PD. The building was being evacuated. Jake, gasping, pulled the tiny, waterlogged recorder from his pocket and handed it to Walsh. "It's all there." She took it, nodding grimly. "Crow?" "Inside. The basement workshop." As the police moved in, Reaper put a hand on Jake's shoulder, steering him away from the chaos. They stood by his bike, the sun baking the pavement dry around them. "You okay?" Reaper asked. Jake nodded, his adrenaline fading into a deep, bone-weary relief. You came in the elevator.
How?
Reaper gave a half-smile. When you didn't check in, I called in a favor from an old friend in building security. Turns out, Crow wasn't as beloved as he thought. He looked back at the building. It's over.
And it was.
The recording was the keystone. With Crow's confession and the seized internal servers, the case against Praetorian and the corrupt network it represented became undeniable. The sign still reads Martinez Mobility Solutions. But the operation has expanded. The garage is now the flagship of a non-profit network, funded by the settlement from the Praetorian case. Jake oversees a team of 12 mechanic veterans. They have a proper clinic attached, with real doctors and therapists who listen. Sophie is deep in her biomedical engineering program, already interning with a firm that designs adaptive equipment with users, not for them. Reaper sits on the board of directors, his leadership steering their growth. The Brotherhood, its reputation forever changed, runs charity rides and fundraisers, their patches now associated with hope, not fear. One evening, Jake is at his workbench, not fixing a chair, but sketching a new design for a pediatric walker. The wall of photos has grown to over 200 faces. Sophie walks in, using only a single cane now. She sets a coffee next to him. You could go home. It's late. Jake looks around the garage. The soft glow of the tool lights, the scent of metal and oil, the quiet hum of purpose. He thinks of the desert, of the thunder of bikes that once meant the end, and how it now sometimes means brothers just stopping by to help. I am home, he says. The screen fades to text. Jake Riker's model is now in 27 states. Sophie Thorne graduates next year with honors. The VA has adopted Jake's user-centered design protocols nationwide. Gareth Grip Crow awaits sentencing. And in a humble garage in Mesa, the work continues, because the best way to fix what's broken is to listen to the people who hurt.